Facebook Live เริ่มแล้วนะคะ
ว่านถ้าพร้อมเราเริ่มได้เลยนะคะ
ก็ขอบพระคุณทุกท่านมากนะคะที่เข้าร่วมงานวันนี้ตอนแรกนึกว่าจะขอรอคนอีกแป๊บนึงแต่ว่าคิดว่าเราน่าจะเริ่มได้เลยนะคะก็ขอแนะนำตัวเองก่อนละกันว่านชื่อว่านฉันทวิราชวงศ์นะคะปัจจุบันเป็นอาจารย์ประจำภาควิชาการวางแผนภาคและเมืองคณะสถาปัตยกรรมศาสตร์จุฬาลงกรณ์มหาวิทยาลัยนะคะแล้วก็เป็นหัวหน้าทีม Foresight and Futures Lab ที่ EP.4 นะคะแล้วก็สำหรับงานนี้เนี่ยก็วันก็เป็นที่ปรึกษาให้กับกระทรวงดิจิทัลในการทำตัว policy lab นี้ด้วยวันอยากแนะนำทุกท่านนะคะเข้าสู่ policy lab the series นะคะเป็นโปรเจกต์หนึ่งที่ทางสทช.นะคะหรือ Office of the National Digital Economy and Society Commission หรือว่า ONDE นะคะได้ทำมาเนี่ยตลอดปีที่ผ่านมาเพื่อที่จะศึกษาว่ากระบวนการต่างๆที่จะทำให้เราสามารถที่จะมีนโยบายของเรื่องดิจิทัลเนี่ยดีขึ้นมันจะเป็นยังไงได้บ้างนะคะโดยที่ผ่านมาเนี่ยซีรีส์นี้มีมาแล้ว3เอพิโซดนะคะอันนี้จะเป็นเอพิโซดที่4ก็คืออันแรกเนี่ยจะชื่อ The Beginning ซึ่งไอตัว The Beginning เนี่ยที่เราพูดถึงก็คือว่าเราจะเล่าว่าไอ DES Policy Lab หรือว่า Policy Lab ของกระทรวงดิจิทัลเนี่ยสามารถที่จะมันคืออะไรก่อนแล้วก็ทำไมเราถึงควรจะมีตัว policy lab นั้นนะคะมี philosophy หรือว่ามี methodology อะไรใน policy lab นี้นะคะในเอพิโซดที่2ที่ผ่านมาเนี่ยก็ชื่อ The Way นะคะเราทำ co-creation กับใครบ้างแล้วเราก็ทำกระบวนการยังไงบ้างมีวิธีการในรูปแบบไหนบ้างนะคะอันดับที่3ก็คือชื่อ The Labซึ่งตัว The Lab เนี่ยที่ผ่านมา1 ปีเราก็เอากระบวนการต่างๆที่เราคิดว่ามันน่าจะดีเนี่ยลองไปทำ Pilot Test กับโครงการต่างๆของตัว DES มาแล้วนะคะเราก็เล่าให้ฟังซึ่งทั้ง3เอพิโซดนี้ทุกท่านสามารถที่จะติดตามดูผ่านใน Facebook ได้นะคะมันมีวิดีโออยู่ทีนี้ในครั้งที่4นี้นะคะก็ชื่อ The Rise หรือว่าการที่เราจะพัฒนาก้าวหน้าต่อไปในอนาคตนะคะ The Rise เนี่ยเราก็อยากที่จะพูดถึงว่า policy making หรือว่าการวางนโยบายแล้วก็กระบวนการดิจิทัลเนี่ยหรือว่า Digitalization เนี่ยมันควบคู่กันยังไงบ้างมันเป็นเหมือนของ2ด้านที่มันต้องอยู่มาคู่กันตลอดนะคะแล้วก็เราจะทำยังไงเพื่อที่ให้2สิ่งนี้มันสามารถที่จะไปด้วยกันแล้วก็ช่วยส่งเสริมให้สังคมของเรามันดีขึ้นได้นะคะโดยงานนี้นะคะว่านก็อยากจะขอแนะนำทุกท่านอีกทีนึงว่าเรามีบรอดแคสต์2ช่องทางนะคะช่องทางแรกก็คือทาง Zoom หากใครอยู่ใน Zoom เนี่ยก็สามารถที่จะตั้งคำถามเป็น Q&A ผ่านแชทมาได้นะคะแล้วก็ส่วนท่านใดที่อยู่ใน Facebook Page ของเรานะคะ Facebook Live ก็สามารถที่จะตั้งคำถามเนี่ยผ่านคอมเมนต์ต่างๆมาได้เหมือนกันท ทีนี้นอกจากนั้นเนี่ยก็ในระหว่างทางนะคะอาจจะทุกคนอาจจะกำลังมิวต์อยู่แต่ว่าในช่วงที่เป็น Q&A สุดท้ายเนี่ยก็จะสามารถที่จะให้ทุกคนสามารถเปิดไมค์แล้วก็ตั้งคำถามมาถาม panelist ของเราได้เช่นกันนะคะในกระบวนการนี้ทุกท่านอาจจะเห็นตัว polling ที่เราเพิ่งเปิดไปนะคะถ้าท่านใดอยู่ใน Zoom ก็จะเห็นว่าเราให้ความสำคัญกับการวางนโยบายในอนาคตแล้วก็แต่ว่าการให้ความสำคัญกับเรื่องพวกนี้มันมีหลายด้านนะคะเราให้ตัวอย่างมา5ด้านไม่ว่าจะเป็น co-creation ไม่ว่าจะเป็นการสร้าง inclusivity ไม่ว่าจะเป็นการทำ digital literacy หรือว่า policy testing หรือว่า system thinking นะคะก็อยากเข้าใจมากขึ้นว่าแต่ละท่านเนี่ยคิดเห็นยังไงเกี่ยวกับการวางนโยบายในอนาคตนะคะระหว่างท่านตอบนะคะเดี๋ยวว่าจะขอแนะนำ panelist ของเรานิดนึงแล้วก็ก่อนหน้าแนะนำด้วยก็คือว่าเราจะเห็นได้ว่ามีชาวต่างชาติอยู่ใน panelist ของเรานะคะซึ่งเดี๋ยวทั้งเซสชันนี้จะเป็นภาษาอังกฤษแต่ว่าว่านจะ wrap up เป็นภาษาไทยอีกทีนึงก็เดี๋ยวยังไงว่านอาจจะค่อยๆผันตัวให้เป็นพูดภาษาอังกฤษนะคะหลังจากที่แนะนำแต่ละท่านแล้วนะคะขอแนะนำท่านแรกนะคะอาจารย์ดร.อติชาติพุทธิกันนะคะผู้อำนวยการ Asian Institute for Digital and Innovation นะคะหรือ AI ค่ะสวัสดีค่ะอาจารย์อยากให้อาจารย์รบกวนเล่าถึงประสบการณ์ตัวเองนิดนึงคร่าวๆก่อนก็ได้ค่ะจะได้ให้ทุกท่านเริ่มเข้าใจว่าpanelist ของเราแต่ละท่านเนี่ยมีที่มาที่ไปยังไงบ้างหรือว่ามีประสบการณ์ในด้านไหนบ้างคะ
ภาษาไทยหรือภาษาอังกฤษนะครับ
ช่วงactually let's do it in English just so that we can start getting to really understand each other as panelists and then we can ask questions to each other as well. Please go ahead, Dr. Tisha.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very honored to be here today. My name is Atichat Pratikan. I'm the Executive Director of the Asian Institute of Digital and Innovation. We call ourselves ID, AIDI. So we are the independent, privately owned research institute that focus on policy. We are try to gather policy makers, practitioners, and academians to work together to get out. I'm actually working on other parts. I'm part of the academic universities. I've been helping at the Thammasat University and the Thurukit Bandit University. And I'm also holding a government position at the Thailand Science Research and Innovation Office, which is we responsible to make a policy for Ministry of the new ministry. The very long name is is called Mahesi. So it's basically we're doing a science, technology, and as well as the innovation and research for non-science tech as well.
I see. Thank you so much. So Dr. Atichat will sort of come in as more of an academic and policy maker's background, and then he can kind of help us understand the policy research aspect of digital policy as well. Next up is คุณจิรายุทธทรัพย์ศรีโสภานะคะหรือว่าคุณท็อปเป็นประธานเจ้าหน้าที่บริหารนะคะ founder and CEO of BitCup Capital Group Holdings. Please, คุณท็อป would you like to tell us a bit about your backgrounds and your expertise?
สวัสดีครับทุกคน Hello everyone. My name is Top Jirayut. Thank you for inviting me today, and it's a pleasure to meet you all today. So a bit about myself. I've been a fintech entrepreneur for the last 7 years. I created 2 cryptocurrency companies here in Thailand. I'm one of the earliest Bitcoin enthusiasts since 2013, back then when people didn't understand what Bitcoin was. And I've been through a lot. And currently I am the founder and group CEO of BitCup. We are the largest blockchain and cryptocurrency companies here in Thailand. Under our group, there are 3 companies. The first one is a fully regulated cryptocurrency exchange. We are one of the 3 companies with this license in Thailand. We are considered as a new financial institution under the Thai SEC. We got this license from the Ministry of Finance. But BitCup currently accounts for about 90 to 95% of all the cryptocurrency transaction in the country. So mostly people use us for crypto transactions. And the second company is when we push blockchain beyond the money system. We call it the BitCup Blockchain Application Company. So we try to integrate blockchain applications to different companies here in Thailand, for big corporations, for governments, even for the publicly listed companies. One of our proudest project was the most recent digital bonds by the Ministry of Finance. We did the earlier one to create the blockchain on, to create the digital bond onto the blockchain, the digital project with the government. And the third company is called the BitCup Academy company. This is where we create this company to educate the public on the digital transformation, on the blockchain applications, on even we go to the B2C markets on how to trade, how to open a cryptocurrency account, how to send money across with cryptocurrency. Right now we're a company of around 140 people, but we will hit 200 people this year, one of the fastest growing fintech startup in Thailand. Personally, I'm also on the board of director of the Thai Fintech Association. We have about 170 companies in our group. My background, I was reading economics at school. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much ค่ะคุณท็อป so เดี๋ยวนะคะขอปรับเป็นไทยนิดนึงก็คือว่าขอบคุณคุณท็อปมากนะคะแล้วก็คุณท็อปเนี่ยจริงๆก็จะเข้ามาในมุมของ private sector นะคะหรือว่าเป็น tech entrepreneur ที่หลายๆท่านก็จะเริ่มเห็นว่าเทคโนโลยีบางอย่างเนี่ยมันเข้ามาเริ่ม disrupt ในเชิงของตัวนโยบายต่างๆนะคะso คุณท็อป will come in more of a private sector technology firm standpoint, and as you can see around the world, tech companies are disrupting a lot of policy making and also laws and regulations and things like that, amongst many other aspects that tech companies are disrupting in both good ways and also potentially a questionable way, right? So in this sense, I think we can start to have a very interesting dynamics at the moment. And then lastly is Courtney Savvy Lawrence. She's an innovation and sustainable development strategist, the head of exploration at the UNDP, or the United Nations Development Program, Asia Pacific Regional Innovation Center. So Courtney, thank you so much for joining us today. Would you like to sort of introduce yourself a bit and then tell us a bit about your background as well?
Sure. Sawadee-ka. Thank you for the introduction, and also thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor. Just to share, wear a few different hats. I have been in Thailand for the past 6 years, and I've been with the UNDP Regional Innovation Center, which is based here in Bangkok, covering 24 countries in the region in the Asia Pacific, but have been in this role in the past 2 years or so. Prior to that, I was also teaching human-centered design for social innovation at Thammasat and running a social innovation company around the region as well. So today I'll be focusing a little bit more on the inclusive innovation angle and providing some examples and snapshots of some of the opportunities and challenges, the ways in which other governments and policymakers in the public sector, regionally especially, is responding to some of the current context, of course, COVID-oriented, and looking forward to that. And one other hat that I wear, I'll just mention it too, which is a volunteer space, but I'm co-founder of the Bangkok-based Circular Design Lab. And this was actually started with 3 other Ajans from Thammasat University. And we really just looked at it as an open source, open innovation platform to see how might the collective, public, so to speak, the citizens around, tackle some of the most complex issues, such as waste management, air pollution, unsustainable fast fashion. So most of what I think I'll be sharing is actually a little bit more about relevant to the public sector, relevant to the policy side. Thanks again for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you everyone for joining us as well. Right now we have about 50 participants on Zoom, and I'm sure there's more on Facebook as well. To begin this sort of discussion, I kind of want to dissect, there are about 2 dimensions that we'll be covering, right? When we speak about public policy or policy making and digitalization, on the one hand, we can start to talk about how policy making can really support or hinder some digitalization processes as well. On the other hand, we can also start to talk about how digital tools can be helpful for policymakers, either in reaching out to people who you might not have heard before, heard in the sense of like their voices, their needs, etc. And then you can also use digital tools to analyze certain aspects of policies related evidence, right? So these dimensions will go hand in hand, and we might talk about it interchangeably sometimes. So just be aware of that. And then I think overall, that's sort of like the framework that we'll be discussing about. To sort of begin this conversation, I'd like to ask all panelists, and whichever one of you can go first as well, is at the moment, we've seen that Thailand's socioeconomic landscape is sort of in a weird place just because of COVID-19 as well. But if we were to say, imagine in the next 3 to 5 years, you know, there's technological change that's happening for sure. There's climate change. There's many other trends and aspects that are changing. How do you see Thailand's socioeconomic landscape? How would it look like in the next 3 to 5 years? And where are the challenges and opportunities that we can kind of reap the benefit from? Would you like me to sort of like point to each one of you, or you can go ahead and start opening up your mic to answer? I suppose like Ajahn Athitat, feel free to start.
Okay, I think Ajahn Wan you can just point to us. That would be easier for us.
Works. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I think it is very good question, and has been a question of policymakers, not only in Thailand but all over the world. But things happen a lot, and things change a lot in the past. Not only about COVID, but about many other things. In the past year, we've seen the news from all over the world. We can feel that the things happen more extreme, and things are interrelated and entangled together. But if it's very hard to imagine what will happen in the next 3 to 5 years. But what I can tell that something that like a small watch list that I personally watch for myself. For global political environment, I think we can see that the polarization is everywhere and at every level. So countries has been challenged in the old sovereign perspective, because the boundary of the countries start to blur. The business has collaborate and work together and actually combine to the more bigger and more powerful entity in some way, especially in the digital sector, that many of the digital giants become more and more influence, more powerful to many of the countries. So we've seen another thing is we've seen in political instabilities, like especially in Thailand, we heard the news about the potential revision of the cabinet and the competing ideology between from within parliament and outside parliament, and some of the long-term strategy. Long-term policy has been challenged, like Thailand tried to put out the national strategies, which is we know in Thai that the ยุทธศาสตร์ชาติ 20 ปี or 20 years national strategies. So that has been challenged a lot especially after this pandemic event. For the economic side, we see the downturn. I think the Bank of Thailand just recently announced the new figures. Beginning of the pandemic, they said that we will down for about like 5%, I think, if I remember correctly. But the latest number is minus 8% each. Yeah, so we will see real impact. We will see more stimulus package to come out, and but it's very difficult for country as Thailand because we rely on external economics a lot, and we rely on global trade. For the digital part, I think we've seen the digital transformations it will be more prevalent. It will diffuse to many sectors, and it certainly accelerated. I think the pandemic event is only the catalyst to make it going faster. But I think one thing is that we will see more gaps between people or company or countries that can adopt these paradigms as the leaders, and country that not very well adopt or like be the lagger of this. The difference of the development level will be clear, and I think if it will happen at the individual level as well. That means that we can somewhat expect more inequalities for people who cannot access or cannot very well equipped with digital mindset or digital literacies. Even though overall, I think the increase of the productivity will come from other technology as well, like biotechnologies, which is digitally enhanced. The technology is always doing good, but I think we can watch for some inequality to be increased, especially for people in the middle class. Productivity will go faster than your income, or something like that. For the social, I think the challenge, many challenges. I don't want to repeat everything, but I think the COVID-19 event has made things more clear. Inequalities is very crystal clear right now, and which area and who is suffer from this event. But one good thing I think that come out of this is it turned out that actually we human as a human race, especially not only people of Thailand, we are actually stronger than many of the government aspects. Like we can, when government doesn't function as it should due to various reasons, I think people come together and try to help each other in more tangible way. It's something that the policymaker have to watch and somehow try to make it even stronger. So I think that because we have been empowered by technologies. And other things about technology is that has been challenged from international technology giants, like Kun Top mentioned earlier that he's working on the Bitcoins, and I think he will have something to share about the regulatory framework or mindset of Thailand. But I think we will see more social impact for both positive and negative. Like we see the cyberbullying, we see the some of the cyber crime happen to more younger and younger people, and I think that the regulatory framework or legal system in many of the countries is not adapt fast enough, and yeah. Another thing is about the climate. You ever mentioned it. We will see more extreme event and more effort to cover it. In some, I think again things will be more complicated, and we will see more extremes event in every angle, and it's even more demand for us to adapt faster and faster. Yep, please.
Thank you so much. So it seems that there's some aspects that are internal, right, to Thailand itself. For example, the sort of political instability that you've discussed, both in the parliament as well as, out on the streets, right, and online as well. And then with COVID, we've also seen that, the GDP has dropped to -8 or so. And more so is that we've begun to really see inequality, upfront, like in our face sort of thing. But that also got encountered by the sort of the strong social capital that we have. It's not only human capital, but how we bond as a society. And in some ways it's bonded by technology itself. And in other ways it's bonded by the physical contact of people knowing each other and being able to trust the society that we live in. And that's kind of give me a segue into Courtney's perspective. Would you see sort of Thailand's future going towards more higher inequality, or do you see that, this is sort of the place where we start to have to grapple how might we support social capital? Is technology widening the gap, or do you see technology as bringing people together? How do you see Thailand's socioeconomic landscape go forwards in the future? Please.
Well, you definitely ask all of the easy questions in one time. Well, for starters, I'm not from Thailand, and it's not really my space to make huge projections. And what I would like to say though is that no one on the planet at the moment can predict the future. And that's what's so fascinating with the space that we're in. It's really about possibilities of scenarios. So there are futures and there are future scenarios, but which ones are the ones that we are actually going to see have traction? And there's so many dynamic factors that would influence the trajectory and in the direction in which of that being said. So yes, it is acknowledged and known from the economic standpoint that Thailand does have one of the highest Gini coefficients, that it's famous for its inequality in some ways. And just in the headlines in the past few weeks, to the point that Dr. Atichat was mentioning, it's not only the biggest informal segment and sectors of Thailand that are suffering. It's soon you can see this effect also impacting the middle class and otherwise. And this is a trend that is not unique to Thailand. It's not unique to Asia. So we're actually dealing with a very global issue, but in a hyper-local context, or at least as we're talking about it right now, in a national context. What I want to say, though, I find it to be extremely fascinating, the role and the power in which policy has to play in all of this. The smart decisions that are being made by the public sector and policymakers right now will have long-lasting cascading effects. And those that are made without such, let's say, deliberation and thoughtfulness. And ideally, we see the coronavirus being politicized in certain government contexts. And this has been deeply problematic. So I would say it's almost too early to tell. We can look at signals, we can look at indicators, we can look at trajectories, but that's also what I imagine the point of also this policy dialogue in the space is about. In real time, what can we anticipate? And then what are the capabilities and the responses that the public sector can actually do to rise and meet those challenges? At the end of the day, no one institution will be able to solve it. And there is no silver bullet. There is no one way to do things. So in a way, it's about who can learn the fastest, who can connect the dots, work across silos. All of these software skills that are not necessarily famous for the public sector either, are the kinds of things that I can say from what we're observing in the UNDP is so many governments and across the region are really asking themselves that question. How do we, and to also the point of this notion of digitalization of things, how do we speed that up? And how do we do it in a way that has dignity and ethics connected to it? And not everyone is asking that question either. So this is also a huge debate happening right now. How much are just COVID-19 responses to make sure that safety nets are reaching those that are on the register to do so? How do we educate all of the children that have been put on pause because their schools are closed, or the context is so dangerous for them to be meeting in large groups, which again, this is still happening in other parts of the region. I have a 2-year-old. He's going to start school the school's open, right? July 1. So, you know, we're all in this experiment together, but to the point of where will Thailand go? I think that's what's really fascinating. It's really about the role of the institutions. And the good news is globally, the level of trust in government institutions has actually gone up overall. Now, there are outliers, and I am from the United States, so we'll leave that for another discussion. But what's fascinating as well here is that this is a really prime moment for you know, government policymakers, officials, bureaucrats to rise to the next generation of opportunity, not just the challenge. So over to you, Juan.
All right, thank you so much, Courtney. I think you painted a very interesting sort of framework that we have to keep in mind as well, that there's no one future that we can predict, right? There's a multiplicity of future possibilities in that we may face and that we may be able to think about. So most that we can do is really looking at, you know, trends and trajectories that we can see right now and see how that are shifting or not shifting in whichever ways possible. On the other hand, I think you've also mentioned that, you know, we have to really start working across silos, and that's been actually the discussion with, you know, Thai policymakers for a while, that, you know, we realize that different ministries, different, you know, even sub-ministries, different work group, they often focus in their work and then forget to really connect to others around them. And that, in a way, will become much of a challenge in the futures that we are going towards. That said, I think in terms of the public-private sector now comes to play, in Thailand in particular, I don't think we're driven solely, well, no one place is driven solely by the public sector. The private sector always have a role to play in the development of different countries. And I'd like to also hear from Khun Top as well, in terms of the private sector coming into, you know, this landscape of changing new paradigms in Thailand. How do you see sort of the future of Thailand, the socio-economic of Thailand? We've talked about how inequality, there's many facets of inequality in itself. Do you see tech companies being or struggling or grappling with the sort of the Thai climate, as well as looking beyond Thailand and going towards looking at tech giants that Ajahn Atishat has talked about earlier? How do you see, you know, the Thai tech companies be evolved in the future and fitting in the role of the Thai development?
Sure. Personally, for me, I foresee that in the next 3 to 5 years, this is going to be the most exciting era for the changes that is going to be happening in Thailand, and also quite worrying because there are so many legacy systems in Thailand, legacy thinking, less legacy skill sets, you know, legacy technology, and these things are stopping private sector and government sector from growing fast enough, right? In other words, we are not very good at creating digital companies, right, or digital government. We're growing linearly, whereas the world, if you look at the world is moving in an exponential manner. The world is not moving in a linear manner. And this is creating a huge discrepancy, right, between when in Thailand we're moving linearly, when the rest of the world is moving in an exponential manner. So in the next 3 to 5 years, when we hit the inflection point or the internet century, right, that's where the big changes are coming, the big disruptions across different sectors, and we're not going to be able to adjust on time, right? If you look at the statistics, why is the world moving in an exponential manner? If you look at the wind power, the cost of the wind power in the last 40 years, it's gone down by 15 times, right? In the last, not 15%, 15 times in the last 40 years. Or the solar power energy, right? It's gone down by 250 times in the last 40 years, right? Or who could could you imagine that, you know, your iPhone right now has more computing power than when we used to send a man to the moon, right? That is how fast the world is moving. But, you know, companies in Thailand, governments in Thailand, we are moving linearly. And when, you know, say, for example, when COVID hits us, you can see a lot of people are suffering. Whereas my company is one of the very few that's, you know, added extra 50 headcounts, and we're growing, you know, like crazy because we know how to create digital strategies, right? Companies without this digital strategies suffers way a lot more. And there's a new trend called deglobalization, right? Not globalization, deglobalization between the West and the East, right? The rise of China and the US fighting to be the new superpower. And we're like a small country in ASEAN with 70 million people. How are we going to adjust to this deglobalization trend? Right? This is quite worrying because if you take out your phone right now and you explore all the apps on your phone, what are really the Thai apps that people are using? Right? I can think of one really, which is Thai banks, right? Bank apps to transfer money. The rest is either from the West, from the US or Europe, right? Like Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, right? Google, Microsoft. And the other, you know, the rest of the apps are from China, like WeChat, Alipay, TikTok, right? Lazada. And this is quite worrying because the last industry that are fully Thai owned, or the last Thai app that people are using in Thailand is Thai Bank. And there are so many legacy thinking and legacy systems, and we're not moving in a linear manner as in the past. We're moving in an exponential manner. And this is where Thailand could become a technology user, not a technology provider. And all the GDP, all the data would be going outside of Thailand. And you know, we're gonna stuck in this middle income trap as a result. And the one thing about digital companies is that they're winner takes all, right? There's, you know, Amazon, just one company, is bigger than the rest of the e-commerce companies in America combined, right? Or there's only one global monopoly like Facebook in this social media industry. Or in e-commerce industry space, you can have local monopoly, right? Amazon for US, Alibaba for China. For Thailand, Lazada and Shopee are fighting. Right? They're both making zero money right now to become a local monopoly. Right? This is the first time in history that oligopoly is making zero money. Right? Not usually perfect competition makes zero money. Right? So people are fighting over to win this local monopoly power. And do you realize that, you know, 80% of all the goods on Lazada is now coming from China? Okay. So, you know, this, you know, in the next 2 or 3 years, I think the big wave is coming into our last Thai apps or Thai owned sector, which is banking. There's a new trend called social banking, right? Digital currencies. People can send money from Facebook Messenger, Line, TikTok, WeChat, WhatsApp. You know, WeChat already became the biggest banks in China in the last 6 years, over Alipay. The valuation of Alipay has exceeded Goldman Sachs, who has been around for 151 years. Right? Alipay has been around for 6 years. Tesla became the most expensive car company in the history of, you know, in the history of America, more than General Motors and Ferrari combined. And they haven't been around for 50 years, right? 40 years, 30 years, no, only recently. Or if you were to combine like Amazon, Google, Microsoft together, these three companies, they are bigger than Thailand as a whole country already. And these companies have been around for less than 50 years. They know how to grow the companies, you know, exponentially, how to create digital companies, where most of the people in Thailand, whether public or private sector, are growing linearly, either because of the lack of skill sets or the legacy system, legacy thinking. This is very costly right now for us. And, you know, all these things that I've been saying, 93% of all the CEOs, governments realize that their industry is about to be changed forever, right? But only 3% has this digital transformation program, trying to reskill their workers, right? Trying to shoot themselves in the foot, you know, before someone else shoot them in the head, you know, disrupt themselves. But 54% admit that they have no clue, of the future actions that they need to take. And this is quite a worrying statistics. 54%, that's more than half of the economy. And the company's lifespan is getting shorter and shorter. Right? On average, before big companies in the S&P 500 companies in the US, the average lifespan was 75 years. Right now, when we hit the internet century, the average lifespan is 7 years. Right? If you were the CEO in the past, it used to take you 5 years to do R&D, research and development, sandbox, etc. It's fine because you still have an extra 70 years of adjustment and disrupting yourself, right? But imagine if you take 5 years today, when your lifespan is 7 years, you really have 2 years left to actually, implement, to make sure your company can stay alive. So I think 3 to 5 years, we're going to see huge change and a huge discrepancy on everything, whether it is unemployment, skill sets, company is not able to adjust, policy is not able to catch up with new technology. And this gap is going to be much, much bigger than the past, because if you understand the exponential graph, one year in the future is going to be the equivalent of 10 years in the past, right? So this big discrepancies is going to be bigger and bigger as we step forward in the future.
Thank you so much, Top. I think it's really interesting because you've kind of painted the picture that there's sort of like, I'd say like two scales. One is very international, right? Where globally, many different countries are moving at different rates of change. For Thailand, we've moved at a constant rate of change, and that's why there's sort of the linearity that we've talked about. But then for some countries that are more invested in the innovations and new technologies, could potentially is moving at an exponential rate of change, right? And so if we move on like this, then the gaps will widen much more than now. Now, if we zoom in back into our country as well, there's also that discrepancy with different kinds of people living in Thailand. Right. There are some people who may not have the rate of change at all, because not because they could not in the sense of their own skill per se, but there's no supporting sort of facilities, factors, and etc. to sort of help them tilt that rate of change towards sort of getting better and getting more improvement to their skill sets. Right. There are some people who are moving at a linear rate. There are some who, perhaps you, are moving at more of an exponential rate. And I think during this COVID time, it really shows who can survive, right? And often is more of those who can change while the time and the situations around them are changing as well. So the adaptability that comes with, the faster pace of change is becoming the benefit for the future, and even for now as well. That said, it's really bringing us to the point where we have to start asking the questions that we've been asking all along, is how do public policy really help support this kind of change? Should it support to one end over another? Do Thailand as a whole look to really move itself up? And how do we prevent the laggards from really falling behind, right? The social safety net aspects have to come into play, the support systems, etc. I'd like to really bring the question back to Ajahn Abhishek. Since you've been working both at, in the research institute, the public sector, the private sector, you've seen sort of like the big landscape of policy making. How, from your experience in public policy making, Kun Top mentioned a little bit about legacy systems that have been sort of embedded within, maybe like in all sectors, right? Private, public, and also in the civic sector sometimes. How do you see those as challenges? Are there other opportunities that we have to really, support and push so that opportunities grow faster? How do you see public policy making is really changing, or how can we change for the better?
Okay. Thank you very much, ครับอาจารย์ว่าน I actually like to make a small remarks that I totally agree with both Courtney and คุณท็อปนะครับก็ as we mentioned earlier, like many of the panel mentioned that I think we will see more gaps between the one who can pick up and the one who can't, and this not only apply to countries but apply to each of the organization and individual as well. But if you ask about how policy making in Thailand, I have been working. I have chance to work with a few ministries in the past, and I have good news and bad news. let's do the good news first. I think technology, especially digital technology, has provided us with a great opportunity to leap forward. It's very accessible. It's not like a hard technology, but which is usually protected by patent and other stuff. I think the way digital technology has been developed is more on the open innovations, which is sharing among people who are interested in the global communities. I think from that perspective, I think it is the opportunity for policy making to adopt some of the digital tools and something like that to allow us to make now we can make something like very pinpoint or very some of the policy research is very difficult to do in the past, or it's take really long times. And if we can adopt some digital tools, it certainly can make more accurate and more faster. For instance, I think many of the country do the during the pandemic event, we do the quarantine and we try to limit the movement of people, and it's very hard to us to assess the effectiveness of some of the programs that we launch. But if we use digital technology, we can certainly do that. And in some sense, I mean, like we can use the mobile data and analyze and all those stuff, right? And use AI and all those stuff. In some sense, technology is not only empower people, but also empower policymakers as well. And but the thing that is more challenge to the policy making process is that the way policy making process might not be purely rational in all the cases. Good policy has done based on the data, right? We use data-driven, we use research-based or fact-based policies, and try to form and make it balance between public benefits and the private benefits, right? Because the role of the government is try not to how you call it, not to bias to one other side, but actually make the game, like the trade game, more fair to everybody. But fair for one people, it might be different from others. In many times, the policy has not been made like that. It might be like, there might be some direction that some people want to push, and they use lobbyists and other stuff instead of evidence-based policy. They have policy first and ask the academic, use the dark way to do it to create evidence to support their agendas. So this is very alarming and it's very bad. But I think it's also an opportunity for citizens like us to use because digital makes things more transparent and we can, regardless of the political system that you use in any country, we've seen that in China that it's not for their political system, that also has been challenged. We have seen this during pandemic times. Even though some of the countries like the US, this has been challenged as well. Like, well, I don't actually know what the political system of the US are anymore, right? It's very hard to discuss. But to keep it back to the topic is, the way policy making process is up to the way decision makers think, and the technology is there. It's allowed policy making process to be more participatory, allow people to be more engaging. It's easier, cheaper, and faster to do so. But if the mindset of the people who sit in the top of the table is still thinking the same, it's very challenging. But it's not zero hope because technology empower everybody, but it's how we use it. And on the challenging side, some of the policy is really lacking, like the case of Ubers and Grabs. We have seen that we are not even sure is it legal to do that, or can we use it, or we cannot, or is it matters? Does the policy or the regulation matters anymore? This is the paradigm has been challenged a lot in the policy making space. Okay, back to you, Ajahn Wan.
Thank you so much, Ka. Just before I move on a bit, I'd like to also remind everyone that you can, ask questions. You can type it in the Q&A, type it in the chat, or if you're on Facebook, feel free to make comments, and then we have a team who will copy and paste that comments into the Zoom group as well. And the same goes to all panelists. If you have any questions or any challenges to statements that other panelists has made, I think those create interesting conversations, and we can definitely learn from different perspectives. I think that's sort of one of the goals of this webinar. You've mentioned quite a lot about how technology is actually mostly is for good, right? Sometimes it's because it's driven by profit, oftentimes. I think the question that Courtney brought up earlier about ethics and other things could sometimes be kind of overshadowed. On the other hand, if coming back to the policy making, right? Mainly you've discussed how policy making has an aim to level the playing field for everyone to have a chance to play with the same rules under the same sort of same opportunities and challenges. How do you see, public policy really level that playing field in when technology is really coming in, disrupting many different fields itself, right? It's basically introducing new fields to play with and see what are the rules can be made within that field. How do you see that? One is public policy help really balancing this out for everyone, right? Not only for the innovators or the early adopters, but also for the laggards that could come in later on. Secondly is how do you see policies can really support and help tech innovators to really introducing new fields that can actually be beneficial to the society as a whole.
I think, to be frankly, I think the way academic, I think all over the world, not only in Thailand, when we see new technology or new opportunity or something like that, I think we can like using some techniques like a foresight to try to create what future scenario would look like. But the challenging part is that for Thai context, how can we use that knowledge that we gain or we can foresee to actually making policies? Because I think many of the policies that policymakers that is working with the government, they know and they've seen this, but the speed of doing this from like I think the way Thai culture has shaped us is we are more like a risk averse, and we like to wait for things play out. But at this time, like Kun Top already said, things will not wait for us. When things play out, we might not exist anymore. And some mindset like this is not universal in policy making space right now. Even though, well, I think we can go deep and talk about tools and the way we can help create better policy. We can do that all days, but I think key point is that how can make this known? How can we? Well, I don't want to use the word change the mindset of the policy making people, but sometimes maybe changing people who actually making policy might be required, something like that. But I'm not sure that is because it has to be play out with the political system as well, and in some the limitation of Thailand right now is we don't have we it's like we have lack of trust within the system, and some people who are benefit, who are trying to politicize everything and try to polarize everything will benefit from this. It's like when you're in the war, people who actually win is people who actually sell weapons, right? So we have a lot of people like that, but the system is not good enough to filter out something like that. I'm not sure I answer your question or not. You can repeat it to me again.
No, it's okay. Actually, you brought up an interesting sort of framework about how we want to play with risk, right? And I think oftentimes when we see government supporting a certain technology or supporting innovations, that's how investments comes in. Right? If government puts a lot of money into the research of this and that, or putting money into helping startups, etc., that's in some ways that's how you can support the growth of technology. But that also comes with the paradigm that we have in the risk aversion kind of paradigm. Now, I think it's interesting that I do feel that we have to be more brave towards taking risk, but at the same time, it's also the question of accountability with the government towards the people's money, right? Because taxpayers' money is what's driving government. In that sort of dilemma, how do you see this sort of play out in public policy making? How do you see it as a challenge or an opportunity?
Let me add one more thing. Actually, if we see like a big picture, we will see like, oh, there's a lot of problem. The structure also has a problem. We have the DE, right? And we have a Ministry of, higher education and something like that. And they are not very tightly working together. And if we see big picture, we'll see a lot of problems. But I think that's not, let's not lose hope. I think we see something that we see we can create some small change and try to do some experiment and try to explain from there. I think that's something that because we have been empowered by technology, and we have been empowered by new way of thinking. We don't need to wait for anybody to actually resolve the structure, which is maybe not resolvable, but it's not mean that we cannot move forward. We need to create, this small success and try to scale it up. Like many of the governments done is, they try to think small but start big. Think small mean like they want to reach, the audience. They want to create events, like big events, but they start very big, so they put a lot of money on the PR and stuff. We just do need it may be required for them to survive this political storm, but let's work with them and try to show the point that, hey, we can do think big, start small as well, but you just don't leave that out. Yeah. So we have to be, I don't want to use the word compromise, but I want to use, we need to be more balanced between this political front and actually doing the real policies. Yeah.
So much. I also agree with you that from the past, my short experience, I've seen actually a lot of different state agencies are working really hard to try to innovate certain stuff that are actually quite small, but they have potentials to grow much faster if it's supported well and perhaps balancing out with the political climate as well. That said, I'd like to now sort of shift the question towards Khun Top. You've really shown us how technology is driving a lot of development in many countries around the world, and in Thailand as well. And I'm sure this goes to many other countries that technology or the tech industries are driving change, right? And oftentimes the public policy is trying to catch up to some sense. What are sort of the gaps between this rapid growth of technology or tech industries and the existing policies? Are those gaps widening? Are those should we try to close that gaps as soon as it emerge, or when do you think it's a good time for the public policy or policymakers to step in and really address that gap?
Sure. I think the best way to answer this question is to go back in history to when the automobile was invented. When this is the story that I tell everyone when I do a talk. So when you go back and look at when the automobile first arrived in the UK, right? People criticize automobiles. People were scared of this new thing, right? This machine is making loud noises, using a random thing called gasoline, which is hard to find, and broken down all the time. And the worst thing is it kills people, right? Ran over people. And the media even put out the bad stories about automobiles, like run over people again and again, people killed by cars again and again, because bad stories sell more papers, right? And the story got so bad that in 1896, the UK government came out with a new law called the Red Flag Act, right? And this law forces the automobile users to have at least 3 crew members. First one is the driver. The second one is the engineer that sits together with the driver to supervise the engine. And the third person is the guy with the red flag that runs 100 yards in front of the car and warn the pedestrian that death machine is coming. Do not go anywhere near it, right? And after that, policy came out, UK completely lost the automobile industry race, because instead of seeing the potential of a car, right, they allow fear to define their reaction. The UK government puts a guy in front of a car. You can't really realize the full benefit, because this guy running in front of the car is slower than riding horses, right? So people would go back and ride horses. And that's when they lost the automobile industry race. Instead of seeing the potential of new technology, they allow fear to define their reaction. Same with the current situation in Thailand right now. A lot of government policies or governments do not understand technology well, and they're creating this red flag act everywhere. So we cannot realize the full potential of technology, right? And that's a really bad thing. For example, in my industry, right, the goal of cryptocurrency is to make sure that the money transfer overseas is frictionless, global, instant, at a fraction of the cost, right? So I can send money right now from the US to Thailand and make around 1 or 2% profit, actually make more money transferring money overseas. But with the current policies, you have to pay 15% taxes. You're putting a guy in front of a car, right? That's more expensive than what bank transfer of 5% fees, international transfer. People have to pay 15% if they're using cryptocurrencies. So you're putting a guy in front of a car here. Right? You don't really realize the full potential of the technology. And they allow fear to define their reaction. Even the Bank of Thailand said, do not go anywhere near it, right? All the retail banks don't go anywhere near it. Whereas Facebook is creating Libra, China is creating digital yuan. And this is when Thailand is going to be losing the automobile industry race, like in the UK in the past, where all the foreign competition is going to be coming into our country and serve the people. And I think this is quite alarming because, say, if you are a local entrepreneur and you want to create a Grab or Line in Thailand, right? You would be in jail the next day because you're breaking legacy law, legacy system, legacy incumbent players, right? Lobbying and everything, all the legacy system, they're not allowing disruptive technology to happen within the country. But they don't realize that in this era, it's globalization. New technologies are going to be coming in from overseas anyway. Right? And there's this one thing that people have to realize about the world. Right? There's a difference between the word innovation and the word disruption. Right? Innovation is when you're improving existing systems a bit better every day, right? Doing the same things a bit better. That's when you're innovating. But disruption is when you're making new things that make the old things completely obsolete, right? And the new thing can function a lot better, right? That's disruptive. That's disruption. The best example is electric lights, right? The arrival of electric lights did not come from continuous improvement of candles. Right? If you're gonna innovate on candles every day, you want to create electricity, right? But the problem in Thailand is that we encourage innovation. We did not encourage disruption. I think the best way to explain this is to put it in an analogy. Say the whole world is one single big village, right? And Thailand is a household in this big village, right? This is the country, Thailand. And within this house, there's this old man who has been good at making candles all his life, right? Expert at making candles, big guys, right? And there's this little kid who has never had any experience making candles, but he's trying to invent electric light. What is going to be, what is happening in Thailand is that we heard rumors everywhere that there is the arrival of electric light. And what the government is trying to do is go to the big guys, go to the old man and say, God, you are the expert in making candles. You have all the knowledge in the past, all the money. I hope that one day you can create electric lights from your expertise in making candles all its life. It doesn't work that way, right? It requires different thinking, different mindset, different DNA altogether. Instead, we are punishing the little guys in Thailand. This little kid, you're trying to create electric lights. I'm going to put you in jail because you're breaking legacy law, right? And trying to support the big guys, the expert in making candles, but without realizing that disruption does not rely on existing system. But when we are doing global trade, right? We're in this village, we're one house in this village. There's this guy, neighbor from China, a guy called China coming and trying to sell electric light to this old man to our house. We would gladly welcome them, right? There's another guy from the US trying to sell electric lights coming into our house. We would gladly welcome him, right? And what is going to happen to our GDP? The money from our house would be going towards other households, right? Because we're buying electric lights from this guy from China, this guy from the US, but we are punishing little guys in Thailand, hoping that this old man can make electric lights. This is the current situation in Thailand, right? The law, all the legacy system doesn't really help the kid. that's trying to create disruptive technology and trying to hope that one day this man would be strong enough to fight the new guys from China, from the US, which is creating electric light altogether. And eventually, what's going to happen is that we're going to stop using candles eventually. And this old man is going to die eventually, right? And without being able to create electric light, because it's different DNA. But we're going to be consuming electric light from our neighbors, and all the GDP money would be going out to a different household. And that is what I'm worrying about. I think this is probably the best analogy in Thailand. Right? When this small guy trying to create electric light, you're going to put him in jail. You're going to put a guy with a red flag running in front of a car, cannot realize the full potential, all these policies that are coming out.
Thank you so much. I love that analogy because it's really showing who's the big player and who the government runs to, and that's sort of been the historical events from whichever disruption that comes into Thailand. It's also interesting that you raised the sense of red flags act, right, in the UK, and that's sort of what we're doing now to some extent. I know that many different countries also put red flags much sooner than we are, right? In Japan, I think they also put red flags for ride-hailing applications. In different countries, they might have put red flag acts into, say, Airbnb and things like that. In Thailand, I think in some ways, it goes back to what Ajahn Atishat talked about earlier, is we wait. We wait to see how it goes. We wait how the political climate shifts or not shift, and until that political will really comes into play, then we start to act. But then again, like going back to your sort of answer is we're hurting the small innovators rather than really supporting them. So my next question to you is actually, how do you think government's policies can really support the small players, the kid who's inventing the light bulbs and the electricity, rather than, of course, it's not to stop, just going to that one big guy, but how do we actually support the small innovators that are really can grow, have a lot of potentials to grow, and really have the potential to be perhaps the next big guy in the future as well. So rather than like just putting red flags in, how do we make green flags basically for the smaller players?
Sure. So, there are quite a few things that governments can help this little guy trying to create this electric bulb. China is a good example. When WeChat was small, right, they just started off, but they make sure that they start off equal. Right? That's the first thing, start off equal. Right? For Thailand, you're going to be in jail if you're trying to create Grab online 10 years ago. And what they don't realize is that it is a winner takes all, right? If we were going to create Amazon of Thailand, is it too late? It's obviously too late. That's the discussion we should be having 20 years ago. Right? If we're going to create a line of Thailand, Facebook of Thailand, is it too late now? Obviously, it's too late now. That's the discussion we should be having 10 years ago. It's winner takes all. Right? You can't migrate 41 million people online to use a different Thai China app, for example, or e-commerce. They have economy of scale, network effects. Some industries completely too late, fully disrupted. But in some industries, say for example fintech, finance, it's not too late yet, right? What China did was that when their startup ecosystem was small, their little guy was not really strong yet, right? When the US coming in with a light bulb, they said no, right? Go away, don't come anywhere near us, right? Facebook, Google, don't come anywhere near us. We're creating our own, right? WeChat, Baidu, right? Until this little guy can finally invent electric bulb. Then what China did is that they support this little guy. WeChat, all the fintech unicorn in China are supported by governments actually, right? Because they realize that innovation is different from disruption. You cannot back, the old man because he's going to be creating bigger candles, right? He cannot invent electric light. So you should be backing new guys, backing new kids until he's strong enough. And what China is doing now is that telling this teenager to go around to different households and trying to sell electric bulb. WeChat coming to Thailand, Alipay coming to Thailand, Alibaba coming to Thailand, right? Trying to earn GDP, right? Money, just try to sell this electric bulb everywhere because he's strong enough now. But in Thailand, we need to start off equal. This little guy, even within the country, within the households, we're still supporting the old man, trying to make sure that he can invent electric light from candles. But we're still punishing the little guy. So we need to make sure we start off equal. And there are so many things we can start off equal. If you talk about the foreign competition, we should be doing what China has been doing. When the US is coming, Grab is coming line. I mean, some industries too late, but say fintech, not too late yet, right? We cannot say no now to Line or Grab or Facebook, right? The country would collapse for banning Facebook, for example. It's too late. But if you talk about fintech, say if there are Alipay coming in, WeChat Pay coming in, obviously we say no to this teenager from our neighbors. And we make sure that we incubate our own teenagers to create, social banking of Thailand, for example, and make sure that this teenager is strong enough. And then we go and sell electric bulb to everyone else that are still using candles. So to other households that are using candles. So there are different policies that we can do. For foreign competition, we say no to the bigger players to make sure we have our own local startup that are strong enough, deter foreign competition. And within the country, we need to make sure that we start off equal between the old man and this teenager. Actually, more support to the teenagers because we're trying to create electric lights, not candles, right? So, for example, we can start from incorporating companies, right? It takes time, paperwork, signatures, bank accounts, identification, in-person visits. Estonia government is a very good example. They created a digital residency program where people can become their e-citizen. They can create companies online, paperless. Okay. That's gonna remove bureaucracy and friction to create companies. That's the first thing that they can do. The second thing that we can encourage the small guys to grow up strong is to encourage investment. In Singapore, they created this fund, Temasek, government sovereign fund, to invest in startups, to invest in teenagers, not the old guy, right? Teenagers. Thailand, we could create a government fund, not relying on just private sector. But we also need to encourage private sector to increase the investments, either tax incentives, or government-backed co-investment from private or government co-investment in a startup. That's another thing, the second recommendation. The third recommendation would be to make sure to incentivize startup hiring. Right? Ideas cannot happen without great execution. So we need to make sure that startups or this teenagers guy have enough resources to grow. Right? Government could create environments where talents from big corporations can join a startup and gain extra benefits like tax incentives or health or social insurance benefit. So startups or teenagers guy can have support to grow in the future. No. Or there's even legacy law, the immigration law. We currently need 2 million baht per foreign employees, right? 2 million capital registration fully paid up. And we cannot have this spillover knowledge. In Thailand, we're so lag behind as skill sets, right? Reskill workers. And with this current program in place, we cannot have, foreign spillover knowledge. Like China, they became the factory of the world in the last 20 years. They're making computer chip, making iPhone. They're not just gaining revenue from, foreign direct investment, right? But they're also gaining spillover knowledge. They know how to make computer chip. They know how to make iPhone. And they created Huawei, Xiaomi right now, right? TikTok. TikTok is now going over to dominate the US market even,
yes.
Right? So they leapfrogged. They learned from the latest technology, and now they leapfrogged their previous clients. So in Thailand, we need to make sure that we remove this 2 million baht capital registration so we can invite talents into Thailand easily, remove frictions. In America, they even give green cards to talents, right? To great talents to become their citizenship. So we can remove this. And, right now we need four Thai workers to one Thai foreign employee, 4-to-1 ratio. We need to remove this also. So we can attract talents here, and we can learn from, talented individual. And we can reskill the workers at a much faster rate. We cannot rely on universities too, because right now there's this huge discrepancies, right? A lot of new graduates cannot find jobs because their skills are not relevant. Startups cannot find enough talents. There's a huge gap between people wanting a job, but invalid skill sets, and companies wanting to hire, but cannot find the right talent. We cannot rely on universities also. We need to bring in, people that are working in the field, relevant experience, and learn from them, spill over knowledge, right? So we can support the little guy to create electric lights. That's another policy. Or another legacy law, like company incorporation related, like stock option. We can't even do ESOP right now in Thailand. People have to create a company in Singapore, a tax incentive, and more advanced legal structure. It is quite funny because if you look at Singapore, say in my space, in the fintech space, their financial institutions are doing really well at providing bank accounts, and bank account penetration, internet penetrations are great. They are I don't think there is any unbanked individual in Singapore. But the most interesting thing is that Singapore has the most fintech companies in ASEAN. Right? There's no pain point to solve there. But the reason is because it's so hard to create legal structure in Thailand. There's no ESOP program. Everyone is creating headquarters in Singapore. And they're gaining all the benefits, right? Talent, capital, activities. They're a very small country. So we need to also fix up our legacy law on ESOP and other share buybacks program, tax incentives, so people don't go and create their headquarters in Singapore. We can also create this peer-to-peer startup founders. In Silicon Valley, a good thing is that there are so many graduates, successful entrepreneurs, fully exited unicorn, and they help and coach, uprising startups. There's this society, entrepreneur society program that people can learn from each other, peer-to-peer support from mentor, right? Successful mentors. So we need to create this also, and government can encourage this by either investment, environment, or area. In Singapore, there's this startup area. What was it? Terminal, the whole building. We can use True Digital Park, for example, in Thailand as an incubator area where startups can learn from each other. That's another thing that we can help the little guy. And I think it's time that the head of the household listen to the little guys more, not the old man. Regulators should open more public hearing often. It's finally the time that government works closely with the private sectors before they create new policies, which is going to impact the whole industry. The one that create policy should really know the game. Right? If you're going to create a game of football game, right? Rules on the football game, you need to know how to play football. So clearly, it's time that you talk to the football players, right? To co-create policies that make sure that we are not creating a guy with a red flag in front of a car, right? To make sure we realize the full potential. So government needs to listen to public more and private sector, open more public hearing before they launch something. And it's time government talk to each other. In Thailand, we're a country that is very unique. So many regulators, and they're just looking after their own thing. Revenue Department is looking after tax related, right? Bank of Thailand is looking after currency. The SEC is looking after security law. But we're in this moment where new technology is overlapping across different sectors. Say stablecoin, the arrival of stablecoin or Libra. Is it currency? Is it assets? It's time that the SEC is talking with the Bank of Thailand. They are talking with the Revenue Department. So they need to listen to each other more and co-create something that we need a conductor, because we're playing different music here in the country. We need one conductor to make sure we play the same song.
Thank you so much. I think you brought up really, really interesting aspects in how and in which area we can support the little guy, right? Or the smaller player that are stepping up their game in this new fields that they're creating. You've mentioned, create ease the frictions in terms of paperwork and getting the incorporated. You've mentioned how actually investments is another sort of feed to help this person grow in the future. There's also creating the sort of talent ecosystems within the country that requires, perhaps lowering the immigration laws and things like that. These are really, and I'm sure there's a lot more, and we've begun to really see how it's a very complex problem, right? From looking at, us as a country and trying to strategize our position in the world where, there's innovators, there's laggards. I'm not sure where we are right now. There's also within the country how to balance innovation versus inequality, where some certain things like technology can really widening the gap of digital sort of literacy and things like that. So I'd like to also complicate this matter even more by bringing in Courtney. So Courtney has been working a lot more on social innovations, and you've seen the sort of inequality and different aspects of the society in Thailand. And I think bringing your perspective from outside of Thailand really helps as well, because sometimes when we see things in everyday life, we kind of forget certain things, and bringing new perspectives always help. I understand you have slides as well, but I'll just ask the probing question first, just so that the audience know what you're getting at. Is that right now digitalization is happening, that's for sure. Now the question becomes the importance of inclusive innovation is probably matter even more now, right? And then public policy and public policymakers really have to bringing that into perspective. So inclusion, innovation, disruption, these are all very complex words in itself, and it has a lot of implications to our everyday life. So that's like the sort of, I guess I'd like to hear more from you in which aspect do you see this going in the future?
Sure, thank you so much. And I was just a few comments first, just to make a little bit of a bridge. So I was kind of smiling as I was listening to, actually, I feel like Kun Top, you're like a poet. So thank you for all of these metaphors and, more, I think, figurative ways of looking at some of the challenges. But actually, like I mentioned at the very beginning of the introduction, I'm also an entrepreneur, and I registered a company in Singapore for the very reasons that you had already identified, which was, well, being here in Thailand as a foreigner, if you want to start something, it's really not that easy. Singapore, you can do it very quickly. And I'm not making an advertisement for Singapore, but just to say, you know, one of the later points that I'll bring up, because it's in the slide, but when you know, researchers are studying innovation and how do you foster that from a policy standpoint, there is a piece here that is actually about incentivizing you know, a little bit more freedom amongst who is in your country and how are they enabled to set up, what does that ecosystem look like. But just a few things that, you know, in terms of a response to what I'm hearing as well from Kuntop and Ajahn Atichat, you know, what we're talking actually about too, and we haven't really used this word yet, but it's really about systems change. And when we talk about innovation or disruption, you're also looking at, we're at a crossroads, and we can have first order incremental change. And that's obviously an option. How do you tweak the thing? How do you make the candles maybe bigger or last longer, for example, to draw on the metaphor? Or second order change, which is really about a completely different system. But policymakers and government officials that I've been interacting with, last year we ran a series of 3 Gov Labs, and this was on the platform of the Youth CoLab, a UNDP initiative funded by Citibank throughout the region. And it was to bring policymakers into the space because this initiative was focused on social entrepreneurs. So a lot of those questions that you're also bringing up around enabling environments, as well as the education, or kind of linking, you know, the peer-to-peer networks and the ways in which you're, you know, nurturing the next generation of talent to be curious, to be questioning, to actually not necessarily invent for the existing reality, but imagine and reimagine what's even possible and get there, like the young child in the house in the village metaphor that you were sharing. So one quick thing was just earlier in the week, we had our team had our global innovation team had the chance to have a webinar with Tom Khalil, who used to be the innovation advisor to Obama and Clinton. And these are some of the exact same questions that are coming up. And it actually was referencing and inspired by the reason this whole discussion with him even began was his policy entrepreneurship, you know, I guess you could say, you know, papers and books, you know, he's kind of prolific in this space actually, given that he worked in government and he knew how difficult it was to change these legacy mindsets. So critical, these points that you're bringing up around mindset in culture, right? So how do you shift that? And some of the interesting points he was sharing was one about, I'll just mention a few because I think it's quite relevant as this is a conversation designed for the public sector innovators. But one was about being an influencer, and that's not necessarily Instagram influencer by any means, but the ways in which you operate across silos, and how do you communicate your message, and how do you basically build allies as you go. And if you can't communicate and articulate what you want to do in a way that those people on the other side, if you're to use again the examples of these ministries, Ministry of Finance talking to the securities, etc., if you're unable to leave a meeting where they can actually restate what it is, then you're not really successful, because the language and the coding around how we're trying to communicate our ideas needs to be more or less starting, you know, that's the first fundamental starting point. Another piece is also around, you know, we're talking as well, I think earlier in the discussion around, do you start big or do you start small? Do you build around evidence-based and science-backed proven models? Or how do you foster these kinds of spaces of sandboxes or experimentation? And ultimately, there's a strategy in which you would look at this kind of, you know, a portfolio approach or a mission-driven approach to how are you, if you're trying to invent electricity, well, how do you actually seed the space for R&D, you know, research to be done in something in multiple ways, because certainly there will be failures as you go. But then how do you also bring it along the pipeline so that you can scale it when it's ripe for that kind of investment? So just to say, I thought that was very relevant, you know, some of the things that you were sharing. And this was a discussion we had on Monday nights. Policy Entrepreneurship is the paper that has a lot more detail into that by the man I just referenced, who was an innovation advisor. But I'm really happy to share just a little bit of what we're doing in the work that we're noticing happening across the region, specifically in the space around tech as well as policy making. And so I'm sharing a few visuals because for me, visuals are also helpful anchors for communicating in case you know, you get lost in a train of thought. Like I mentioned, I also used to teach at, so this is a little bit of my own pedagogy coming out. But just a few things that I was wanting to draw upon based off of some previous discussions with Ajahn Wan and the team designing this was, okay, we're talking about innovation, yes, but what kind of innovation do we really want? Do we want another Silicon Valley, or do we really want an Amazon of Thailand? I think actually stepping back and asking ourselves the question, what approach do we want? And then asking, how do we get there is part of the constant tension, if you will. And what is it that is literally, you know, ASEAN or Thailand or Vietnam's own story and version of innovation? We've heard a little bit about China already, and we've heard some anecdotes around Thailand, but I wanted to share a little bit around the context I'm coming from, which starts, of course, with the backdrop of COVID-19. So as of this morning, you know, you're seeing, you know, actually, if you zoom in, we really just see barely a dot for some of the key cities in Asia. So that's a huge testament to really smart ways in which some governments have been responding and actually preempting an explosion that you might see in some other bubbles here on the screen. But one way of looking at it, and I'm sharing again the hat in which the regional innovation team is working amongst with our colleagues and the governments that we're working with across the region, is a reframe. So, you know, actually and this is a quote from Benjamin Bratton, witnessing the largest experiment in comparative governance that we'll likely ever see in our lifetime. So the virus is the control variable. Right now, as we opened with in the very beginning, there is no predetermined future. It's all up for possibility. So how do we get ahead of the curve and imagine that? So COVID-19, as we already discussed at the very opening question, Ajahn Wan, you mentioned, what is the trajectory for you know, the socioeconomic reality of Thailand? And that question is a very valid one that I think globally we're all asking, but there's so many other complex elements that are at play, that are transboundary, that are you know, not something that any single nation state or national government will ultimately be able to tackle on its own. So to the point of the inclusive innovation and what we're talking about, part of, and I referenced just a little bit of this at the very, very beginning, we talk about innovation quite a bit. And typically, historically, it's connected to STI, science, technology, information, ministries, et cetera. And that to such a degree that, yes, we can look back, you know, historically at decades of research and identify some of the patterns of where we see some traction and success. So some of these things that are on the screen probably are not very surprising to you. But the question that also comes up, and part of why from our team we've been exploring inclusive innovation in much more detail, is really about this software component. So if we're talking about building an innovation ecosystem or shifting a system from to second order change or systems disruption, that hopefully in a positive way, such as renewables, as we mentioned just a little bit earlier, shifting from a carbon-based economy to a green renewable economy is not an overnight process. It's already been happening, but where are those spaces in which we can actually catalyze where it needs to go, if that is the objective indeed. But how do we get there, and how do we ensure that no one gets left behind? And in a way that's really doesn't have unintended consequences that are exacerbated, which is part of what we're discussing when we talk about, the contact and trace types of technologies that are being used to surveil, humans in the COVID context, for example. So this quote is from Giulio Quagliato, who is the head of my team. And this is the report that came out in collaboration with Nesta that we did specifically around inclusive innovation and insights around the region, Southeast Asia. And so a little bit connected to Mariano Mazzucato, an economist that's really supporting mission-driven innovation in the EU strategy, industrial strategy. Just like growth, innovation is not neutral. It has both rate and a direction. And the style and how it is done in some cases, can really make things worse. So what we're trying to do is step back and re-ask the question, how do we design something in which we've really thought about these possible scenarios where there can be even more inclusivity, more justice, more dignity. So if you do go to the report, these are just to say, it's not fluffy. It may sound a little bit fluffy until you start distilling and breaking it down. But we're talking about, the ways in which it's helping or hurting. Is Airbnb, catalyzing gentrification in some cities, for example, as it has? Is the, introduction of Uber and even Grab in some cases, perhaps creating more pollution, more car emissions, and more traffic in some places where it might not have otherwise, or disrupting local economies of local taxi drivers, for example. These are the things that often are not thought about at the introduction of those possibilities. So what we're saying is, how might we be able to bring in that lens and ensure that there's a part of the conversation at the minimum? You'll see here as well, participation is a key element that often we keep so binary. We think, oh, it's just for this type of ways of doing things, but not necessarily often thinking about it in terms of policy design. And same with the governance side. How are we designing the incentives or systems? So I'm just going to run through examples, and I'm hoping that they serve as inspirations, because as I mentioned, we've been running Gov Labs at a more micro scale across the region. And it's clear so many bureaucrats, officials, public sector folks, are aware of these gigantic issues at play. It's the how. So how do we do it? And COVID at this very moment has torn the walls down in ways that what seemed impossible before is now a necessity. So for example, within the span of 2 weeks, Bangladesh was able to actually reach 5 million people that were previously excluded. So they had to. It's because it was simply a requirement for the times that happened. So I have a few screenshots of things that are on our Medium accounts. So we work out loud a lot. We write about what's going on. This is specifically a podcast called Innovation Dividend, where we're capturing public innovation stories, definitely from the region, but also from Africa, South America, and around the world, of where phenomenal things that seemed impossible 4 months ago are happening. So another one that I didn't mention here, but exists, for example, in Brazil, is the first, fully digitized Senate that just happened a month ago. So all of the lawmakers agreed formally and officially, and we're also, of course, enabled with and equipped with the technology to actually start to judiciary services on Zoom, or the digital platform. In Indonesia, just for example, we still have, even with tech, a lot of last mile challenges. So even though that the technology may exist, big data we can extract a lot of insights from. If you're government and you're like, okay, big data will help us better understand the needs. At the end of the day, there's still this human element that is not always accounted for in the statistics, in the ways that we might be able to see metrics on the board of social media, for example. So here, just if you read the small text, but just the key point here is that even though, according to this ethnography that was done, the majority of the rural population in this area that they were researching specifically had smartphones, they still were not actually, the efficacy of a government message getting to them was not happening. And why? So that, how do we better understand the user needs, or the human-centered needs of everyone, and not necessarily as a user? So another interesting, I think, paradigm here, and this is from Anil Gupta. So he's the founder of the Honeybee Network out of India, one of the chief advisors and developers of the National Innovation Foundation from 2020. So it's, 2000. So it's been around for quite some time. He's relatively, let's say, well known for grassroots innovation, but he has a book on this, and one of the key quotes from that is that minds on the margin are not marginal minds. So how do we reframe, and this goes back to this legacy mindset question mark, as well as the paradigm in general, how do we reframe and understand that every single citizen, even if they're sitting in a certain part of the socioeconomic strata, have a high value of ingenious already embedded in their daily lifestyle? So how do we also start looking at lead user innovation? I think to the points of the metaphor, right? The ones that are doing creative things that are not necessarily acknowledged. How do we start building formal structures to acknowledge that as well? Just last year, the Philippines passed an Innovation Act that actually has a feature of inclusive innovation. And as a result of that, they're starting to train their policymakers in going out for solutions mapping, looking for these lead user innovators in the field that can then possibly help them scale their technologies, for example. So we're not necessarily only looking at high tech, we're also looking at lower tech, but have just as much indigenous wisdom or traditional methods of solving a contemporary challenge. You can think about agriculture sector here in Thailand in certain types of ways to keep crops vibrant or pesticide free. There's actually a lot of knowledge already that's centuries of practice. All of the fertilizers, et cetera, all of that is a relatively new phenomena. So the point being is, how do we build formal structures from a policy standpoint or a public sector standpoint that acknowledge that these types of innovations are just as valuable, and if not, can also leapfrog if they are scaled? It's the idea itself per se, and sometimes the IP or the technology around it that can be lifted with a higher platform. So at the same time, even citizen initiatives are not a substitute for government policies. So the civil society sector is vibrant, it's active, it exists. At the same time, we have structural violence. We have ways in which we are not bringing everyone together in the same ways. And certain policies are part of that challenge. So just to share a little bit more about the ways in which the UNDP is working with, across the region in this people-centric way, trying to, with the bigger picture intention of better public policy. Just to map a little bit, one of the things that I do is, so I'm head of exploration for our regional team. We have accelerator labs globally. We had 60 that launched last year, heads of experimentation, heads of exploration, heads of data and solutions mapping. So in our region, we had 10 country offices, and now we're scaling to 18 as of August, where we are meeting and we are literally exploring and cross-pollinating all of the different emergent signals that we're picking up from the ground. Might be coming from a local language, not from a social media semantics analysis, for example. Some might be very weak at first, but we're hearing it and then it's growing and scaling. So examples that are on this, we put this onto Kumu, which is a kind of open source platform for putting these types of things together. But just noticing certain types of trends, moving towards digital government, digital education systems. These are things that are moving towards the mainstream. But at the same time, if you look to the left, we're also noticing shifts in paradigms. This is soft, right? This is intangible to a degree, but it's mindsets, it's ways of working that are also shifting. So it's not only the evidence of what we see in terms of a crisis or a request, but it's also this kind of opportunity incentive to start noticing ways of changing things in ways that we could not have thought were necessarily possible before. I know it's a lot of text, but I'm just putting it here in case you want to check it out. This is a screenshot literally of, again, a post. And so right now we're doing a program that's called, technically it's a journey, Next Gen Gov. And just yesterday we launched this online summit with 120 government officials from across the region. And the intention is actually, how do we create a space and a platform and a community where we are looking at all of these other ways and learning from one another, specifically around how to make governments, more agile, more open. How do we also understand how did the ways in which digitalization was happening at such speed and scale in Bangladesh, how might that be transferred, or elements of that be transferred? How did Vietnam generate so many test kits and prevention strategies so rapidly? What was it in their collaboration that made that possible? So if you are interested, this is also online, the information, as well as the agenda and what we did. We were fortunate to have some of the opening remarks from the SG of NESDC, where we have a collaboration as well with UNDP Thailand and the Regional Innovation Center. And this is way too much visual for you, but again, if the slides are up and free available, you can take a look. But this is literally how we're approaching systems change, and a lot of it is moving towards experimentation that can de-risk big scale of the future. So that's in a snapshot as of yesterday's launch, where we are moving forward in the next few months. And to call to your attention, just 2 weeks ago, this was also launched from the OECD. It's actually a handbook of case studies, snapshots, approaches, tried and true, some new, that are specific to innovation, innovative citizen participation, and new ways of building spaces that are authentically bringing in voices of less heard folks. I put this here, maybe I won't go too much into detail, but it's specific to what is pretty phenomenal experiment underway in Amsterdam, which is around donut economics and ways to actually rethink GDP in a more holistic sense that it takes for account the planetary boundaries from the environmental standpoint, but then also certain policies and regulations that are about the human, justice, or the ways in which we're creating a more balanced way to bring everybody, calibrate any of the inequalities that sometimes arise from some of the technologies or digitalization of elements, or private sector even policies as well, that are going unchecked. So the last thing I'll close with is just a quick live case, which is happening now. As I mentioned earlier, I'm co-initiator of the Circular Design Lab. And one of the things that we're working on is air pollution. And actually working on we did systemic design workshops last year with a group of, again, all volunteers on weekends and Saturdays, and meeting in the weeknights. But when we identified the leverage points, why does the air pollution, which was super problematic in Thailand over the past year, especially, maybe less so now that COVID has had, the lockdown has helped with a lot of the immediate reactions. But how do we create more spaces of education and awareness? And then also, how do we create not only policy, but spaces in which there would be regulation that is also checked and balanced and enforced? So this is a bit of a campaign that we've been working on. More will be coming, but it's not always, in this case, it's a bit grassroots to government. We tried to get a policymaker speak at one of our events last year, and we were unsuccessful. And this was, someone told me that part of that is because government is scared to talk to the public. And this is, unless it's scripted, unless it's a safe space where, no one will feel overly accountable, sometimes that's the challenge. There's a lot of really good ideas also coming from civil society sector, but are they being listened to? Are they being heard? And vice versa. Is there that bridge in that channel, which is specifically more related to these platforms that provide that? So I know that was a lot of information, but I know we're kind of hitting the end of the hour as well. So that's a little bit about where we are, what we're thinking about when we think about inclusive innovation, and some of the ways in which we're engaging with different governments throughout the region, especially on that. So Ajahn Wan, thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Courtney. I especially like how you really brought out a lot of examples from different countries, and seeing how, sort of new innovations or new policies are put in place in places where we might not have thought of as good examples. But actually, I believe in every places around the world, there's always good examples for us to learn from, no matter which context they're in, because we can somewhat find similarities over the differences that we have at all times. So I think we're at the end of the hour, but I kind of want to sort of leave you with this question, and I guess all the panelists can chime in and bring in your interesting points as well. And this goes hand in hand with the polling that we've asked earlier in the session of what do you consider crucial factors for better policy making in the future? And the question that I want to ask to all of the panelists is, we've talked about how the future will change, right? How inequality will become a big issue, how climate change will become a big issue. And we've discussed throughout this whole webinars the challenges and opportunities that technology brings, and also public policy makers are facing. So my question is, what is your expectations in the role of the state institutions in the future? And from your hat being on the public sector, the private sector, and the civic sector, what's the expectation that you would like to see in combating that the variety of futures that will be foreseen?
This is a question to everyone, correct?
Yes. I guess since your mic is on, you can go first.
Oof. Well, I just spoke so much. I'll keep it very brief, and I think I'm literally the ways in which it's phrased, next gen gov. I think it's really about how do we usher in this next generation of thinking, of ideas, of cross-pollinating, and we have to be agile with not only the things that we employ, but also the mindsets that we're helping to, mobilize and shape, including our own in that sense. But I'd love to hear the responses from Kuntop and Adan Achichat.
Oh, sorry. Please go ahead, Kuntop.
So for me, I think there are so many collective actions that we need to take from the public sector, from the private sector, and even from the civil sector, because as I said earlier, the world is moving in an exponential manner. We cannot move linearly within our country. Otherwise, there's gonna be a huge gap, a disruption gap. We're gonna be lacking behind on across many industries, and all the benefits, GDP data, customer data, are gonna be going outside of Thailand. So we need to, going back to the analogy, we need to help support the small guys, not the big guys, because to invent electric lights, you cannot rely on candles, right? And make sure you don't support teenagers from neighbors. Make sure our own teenagers are strong enough and we can go and sell electric lights to different households to bring in more GDP, bring in more data into our country. And to create this, there are different factors that I shared earlier that's what the government could do. But another, on the bigger scale, on the macro level, I think another additional action that the government could do is to also raise the wage level, the average wage level. Because if you go back in history, if you study the history of the economic development of the world, if you go back to the Industrial Revolution era, that's when the UK, the British invented a steam engine, right? And the cotton production race. They were able to colonize different countries, right? But back then, the UK was losing in terms of cotton production rates compared to India or China in terms of productivity, because India, China have more population, right? More workers. And what the UK did was to raise the wage level, to force the entrepreneurs to invent new technology, because it's no longer profitable to employ workers. Right? It's too expensive. So they create this environment that forces entrepreneurs within the UK to invent machines, cotton production machine. Eventually, they were able to produce cotton at a much lower cost and a bigger scale. And when they go to the cotton trade, right, competition, they were able to win over the Indian market, China market. At the end, they bring in a lot of money into the country. There are gonna be a lot of unhappy people doing this because of the unemployment. Back then there was a big union, protest of cotton production workers out of jobs. But eventually, because of the wage level and the money coming into the country, the UK was able to become the superpower, number one, because you need to control two things as a superpower. The productivity or the technology has to be number one. You need to control this, right? Produce the highest productivity rate, GDP in the world. Second one is the currency. The gold standard was invented in the UK. But after the Second World War, 1944, the end of 1944, there is a shift in the superpower. That's when the US became the superpower. But back then, how did the US become the superpower? The major power was actually the British was the group of people that discovered the US land. And the way that they incentivized people to migrate to create this new country was to give higher salary, so people migrate from the UK to the US. So start off, they have a higher wage level in the US. So this force their entrepreneurs to invent even more productive machines to compete with the UK. And if you notice two things, all the superpower, control, technology, productivity, and after the end of the Second World War, we also changed the monetary system to the Bretton Woods system, the dollar, right, from the Bretton Woods system. And so I think it's also the government could also help by raising the wage level, overall the wage level, so we can leapfrog, get out of this middle income trap. Before we were the primary sector because the wage level was low. Then we increased the wage level to a certain amount. Then we migrate to the manufacturing sector, the secondary economy. But now we're stuck here, whereas China used to be a secondary economy, factory of the world, and now the wage level is too high. It's no longer profitable for them. Now they're producing tertiary economy, like technology-based products, or even the UK is doing financial services sector. So it's time that Thailand is becoming a tertiary sector, selling bigger profit margin tools, goods and services by pushing the wage level up. So entrepreneurs will create new innovation, new electric lights within the country. That's another, I guess, a policy that I would suggest the government could do, apart from the previous discussion that I shared.
Thank you so much, Khun Top. So Dr. Atichat, feel free to chime in on this conversation as well.
Okay, I think thank you very much, Ajahn Wan. I agree a lot of parts that Courtney and Khun Top has shared. I think that you already summarized a lot of stuff, but I think from government and academic perspective, I think overall we need to use the technology to democratize the process of policy making more. And a few things, because we already recognize that the change is big, it's non-linear and happen very often. We need to create this platform to allow more I would like to call it micro policies makings, and apply to some specific areas. We don't need to use same rules in all world of Thailand, and the government and policymakers need to create more opportunity for policy for themselves, like creating the something like this labs is one of the steps. But government shouldn't try to create policy everything by themselves or by using closed door. We need to create something like this more and more, which is might start with the mindset. And the government need to refocus the role of themselves, which is actually, like Khun Top said, we need to focus on changing the rule of the games to make the teenager be able to compete with the teenager from the next household. We need to stop doing something that make our teenagers hard life. Like Khun Top didn't mention that actually sometimes the head of a household is actually trying to make electricity and compete with the teenager as well. And we need to stop doing like that. And we need to recognize that the role of government is not doing things that the private sector can do, but to set up the rule of the games and make things fair. Things that have like just tools everywhere, the tools that Khun Courtney that have shared, which is very, very comprehensive, and I think Thai people can do. Can pick up. And there's some other tools like regulatory impact assessment, which is been literally announced as a law. But it's up to the people who actually holding the law that they have to take the first step by themselves, that they have to recognize that this is not within Thailand, but it's a global race. And we need, whether we like it or not, we be in this race. And we need to make change start with themselves.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'll try to wrap up and summarize somewhat. We've discussed a range of ideas and framework, but I think the last question really helps sum up everything, and it's reflective of the polling as well. From the participants that we have, most actually also see that sort of working or co-creating new policies with different actors in the space is one of the things that they really want to see public policies or policymakers really do. So we've discussed how it should be cross-pollination. We should do support collective actions more. There should be supports to the small guy in that support, it also means to fend off new teenagers from outside, and also, looking at how we can help grow this youth. We also should think about democratizing the platform and really help make policies not, how to say, like one for all, one size fit all policies, but more tailor made to different needs of people, of technology, of etc. So in all of this, I think it gives a really good segue back into the DES Policy Lab. I think it's an initiative that really brings out all of these aspects that we've been discussing. The Policy Lab itself is trying to really bring in the voices at the marginals, right? As Courtney suggested earlier, that the minds, quoted from Anu Gupta, I think, if I remember correctly, minds on the margins are not the marginal minds. I really appreciate that, because really everyone has ideas that could be supported and cherished, and those ideas are in itself innovations, right? And we've talked about how the private sector are also big players and really help us as a society move forward in the future. And by means of the public sector as well, if we start to recognize all of these players together, start working together as, as a country, we can then really help support the country to grow forward in the future. So I think we're a bit over time, and I'd like to just end this conversation here, although I'm sure it could go on forever, because it's really rich and fruitful. But yes, so thank you so much, Ajahn Atishat, Kun Top, and then Courtney, and have a nice evening to everyone. Thank you. สวัสดีค่ะ
My pleasure. สวัสดีครับ
Thank you so much.